The storm arrived without warning, roaring winds and sheets of rain slamming against the mountainside like an impenetrable wall. Will Carter gripped the steering wheel, eyes narrowing against the blur of water streaking across his windshield. His GPS flickered, then died, and then a sharp, final clunk from the engine. His $1 million sports car sputtered once and went silent, stranded in the middle of a desolate mountain road, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the relentless downpour. "Perfect," he muttered, snatching his phone. No signal. Through the rain, in the distance, a faint light flickered, a lone cabin tucked beneath towering pines. With no other choice, Will pulled his jacket tighter and stepped out into the storm, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the mud within seconds. By the time he reached the porch, water dripped from his hair, his suit clinging to his frame. The door swung open after the second knock. Standing in the dim glow of the cabin's light was Kara Brooks, dark waves of hair cascading over one shoulder, an oversized sweater slipping off one side, smudged with paint. Her amber eyes studied him, not afraid, just assessing. "My car broke down," Will said, breath uneven. Kara hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside. "Come in, unless you'd rather freeze to death out there." Will stepped inside, completely unaware that this night would change his life forever. Inside the cabin, the scent of cedar wood blended with the sharp tang of oil paint, filling the space with a raw, artistic energy. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the scattered canvases leaning against the walls. Will shrugged off his drenched coat, his gaze sweeping the room. No monitors, no phone, just shelves stacked with books, jars of paintbrushes, and half-finished artworks. Kara set a dry towel in front of him. "Here, you're dripping all over my floor." Will smirked, but she didn't return the gesture. He grabbed the towel, ran it through his soaked hair, then pulled out a chair. "You live here alone?" "Who else would be here?" Kara replied simply. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the storm outside. "I used to want to be an artist," Will admitted, the word surprising even himself. Kara arched a brow. "You don't seem like someone who ever had time for art." A quiet chuckle. "I had time, I just chose something else." She nodded, her eyes unreadable but perceptive. "And you? Why live out here, in the middle of nowhere?" Kara's gaze flickered toward the fire, her voice turning distant, because the world out there was too exhausting. They kept talking, about abandoned dreams, about roads not taken. Somehow, in the middle of a storm, two strangers found an understanding neither of them expected. And that night, as the rain drummed steadily against the roof, something shifted. Will didn't leave the next morning. At first, he told himself he was waiting for the mechanic. But when the car was fixed, he stayed. One day, then a week, then a month. Kara never asked why, and Will never explained. Some things didn't need words. Their days passed in a quiet rhythm he'd never known before. Mornings were spent sketching dream houses, afternoons lost in Kara's vibrant colors. At night they sat by the fire and conversations turned into soft kisses, hesitant touches, and then nights of unrestrained passion. Will had never imagined he could love a life so simple. No back-to-back meetings, no high-stakes deals, no need to prove himself. But with Kara, everything felt different. Then one evening, as they watched the sun dip behind the hills, Will turned to her and said, "If I build a house here, will you live in it with me?" Kara laughed, her eyes shining in the golden light. "Do you think I'd say no?" They married a month later, in a quiet ceremony with only a handful of local friends and the whisper of the wind through the trees. No extravagant dress, no grand reception, just two people, two hearts, and a promise. Will designed a home nestled in the valley, a place where he could sketch and Kara could sculpt. They thought it would last forever. But happiness isn't always eternal, and love sometimes isn't enough to withstand the weight of reality. At first, their marriage was filled with joy. Will built his own architecture firm, and projects started pouring in. Kara continued creating art, her work gaining recognition, drawing attention from prestigious galleries. But as Will's name grew bigger, so did the distance between them. He started traveling more, late meetings became routine, and projects consumed his every thought. He used to spend his evenings with Kara, talking about their days, their dreams. Now, all that remained was silence and the constant buzz of his phone. "You don't have time for me anymore," Kara said one night. Not in anger, just quiet resignation. "I'm doing all of this for us," Will shot back, exhaustion evident in his voice. But did Kara ever need the wealth, the success? No, she only needed him. The Will she had fallen in love with, the man who once dreamed of a simple life. One night, as she sat alone waiting for him, Kara stepped into the bathroom, staring at her own reflection. Her eyes were tired, unfamiliar, as if she no longer recognized herself. In an absent-minded motion, she reached for her brush, but her hand knocked over a small glass bottle. Crash! The perfume bottle, the one Will had given her on their first anniversary, shattered against the cold tile floor. The fragrance bloomed instantly, filling the room with its intoxicating scent, stronger than ever before. Kara stood frozen, her breath hitching as a single tear rolled down her cheek. It smelled beautiful, but heartbreakingly, it was the last time she would ever smell it. Love was still there, but it was no longer the most important thing in Will's world. And Kara knew it was time for her to leave. Their marriage didn't collapse in a single night. It unraveled slowly, in forgotten moments, in promises left unfulfilled. Will didn't notice when Kara packed her bags the day she left. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply walked out of his life as if she had never belonged there. "Don't go," he said, his voice rough. The first time in a long time he truly looked at her. "I waited too long, Will," Kara replied, her eyes void of anger. Only exhaustion remained. The divorce was swift, no fights, no last chances. Will returned to New York, burying himself in work, in meetings, in deals, anything to keep himself from thinking about the woman he had lost. But late at night, when the world quieted, the loneliness crept in. The space beside him in bed remained empty. The scent of her perfume had faded, but the memory of it lingered. His career soared to new heights, but there was no one left to share the victories with. Meanwhile, Kara poured herself into painting, creating works that were both breathtaking and heartbreakingly lonely. She had everything except the one person she once waited for. 3 years after the divorce, Will returned to town. He parked outside the old cabin, watching from a distance. The lights were on, Kara's silhouette moving between her paintings. His hand hovered over the doorknob, his pulse pounding in his ears. What if she had moved on? What if she didn't want to see him anymore? The thought almost made him step back. Almost. He laughed, letting her go for the second time. And only when his grandmother, the one person who had always understood him, passed away, did Will finally realize he had lost the most important thing in his life. This time, he couldn't walk away. Will's grandmother had always been the one person who truly saw him, his ambitions, his fears, and the things he never dared to say aloud. She never blamed him for letting Kara go, but one late afternoon, as her strength faded, she held his hand and said, "One day you'll realize that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with." Will had only smiled, trying to reassure her, but when she passed away not long after, her words wouldn't stop echoing in his mind. A few days after the funeral, while sorting through her belongings, Will found an old wooden box with a letter inside. "My dearest Will, life is not measured by the things you accomplish, but by the moments you truly live. If you're reading this, then maybe it's time to set work aside and find what you lost. Go find the girl with the eyes you could never forget. With love, Grandma." Will sat there for hours, the letter clenched in his hand. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to face his deepest fear, the fear that it was already too late. But as night fell, he packed his bags and found her. This time, he wouldn't hesitate. This time, he would knock on that door. The rain fell softly as Will Carter drove through the winding roads leading to the small town he once called home. Familiar sights emerged, the towering trees, the gravel paths, and finally the old cabin where he had once belonged. His heart pounded as he stood at the door. Would she open it? Would she even want to see him? His fingers curled into a fist, then relaxed, and finally he knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Kara Brooks stood there, her gaze just as sharp as he remembered, but something had changed. Stronger, more distant. They stared at each other in silence, the rain drumming softly behind Will. "Why are you here?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes held caution. Will swallowed. "Because I took too long to realize you were the most important thing." Kara said nothing, only studying him. 3 years had passed. Could she trust him again? Will didn't plead. He didn't make empty promises. He simply stood there, waiting. And then something unexpected happened. Kara stepped back, opening the door wider. That night they talked not as the people they were, but as the people they had become. They were no longer the Will and Kara of 3 years ago. They were two souls who had been broken, but who still longed for a second chance. And this time, Will wouldn't waste it. Kara didn't let Will back into her life so easily. She had loved him once, believed they were forever. But 3 years had taught her that love alone wasn't always enough to keep two people together. They started again, not as ex-lovers, but as two people who had once lost each other and were now learning how to reconnect. Will didn't push. He didn't speak of the future, didn't make grand promises. He simply showed up, listening, waiting, proving himself through quiet actions. Each morning they sat on the porch drinking coffee, watching the mist fade from the valley. Kara painted while Will repaired the cabin's roof, built shelves, turning this place into more than just a house, into a home. Little by little, the walls she had built began to crack. One evening, as Will gathered his things to leave, she suddenly said, "Stay." Just one word, but it carried everything she couldn't say out loud. That night they lay beside each other, not out of passion, but because they both knew this was where they belonged. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the small window, Will turned to Kara and asked, "Can we get it right this time?" Kara didn't answer immediately. She reached up, brushing her fingers gently against his cheek, her gaze soft but certain. "We'll try," and sometimes that was enough. Will didn't propose to Kara again. This time there were no grand promises, no elaborate plans, just a set of blueprints. One morning he placed a sketchbook in front of her. "I want to build a house," Will said, meeting her gaze. "Not just for me, for us." Kara flipped through the pages. A small house, not too big, not too extravagant, but warm, filled with light, with a private studio just for her. "This time we'll build it together," he added. Kara studied the designs, then looked up at him. She smiled. "Okay." And so, brick by brick, window by window, wall by wall, they built not just a house, but a life. When the house was finally complete, they stood on the porch, looking out at the horizon. "You know what's funny?" Kara mused, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "What?" "The storm brought you to me back then, but now we chose to stay." Will squeezed her hand, his gaze full of quiet devotion. This time, they weren't just two lost souls colliding in the rain. They were something stronger, a new beginning. In the years that followed, life wasn't perfect for Will and Kara. There were still disagreements, busy weeks, and challenges they couldn't avoid. But this time, they had learned how to choose each other every single day. The house they built was now filled with the laughter of their 3 little girls. 3 tiny angels with their mother's soft curls and their father's sharp eyes. Will still designed, but he no longer let work consume him. He spent his mornings drinking coffee with Kara, his evenings reading bedtime stories to their daughters, and his weekends playing tag in the backyard. Kara still painted, but no longer about loneliness. Her work was now filled with the colors of family, paintings of tiny hands grasping hers, of golden afternoons where a father chased his giggling daughters across the grass. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Will turned to Kara and asked, "If you hadn't opened the door that night, where do you think I'd be now?" Kara smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. You'd still be successful. You'd still have everything. But you wouldn't have me. And you wouldn't have them. Will stayed silent, watching their 3 daughters play on the porch steps. One of them, the youngest, toddled toward him and tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, come play with us," she giggled. Will glanced at Kara, who only smiled. Without hesitation, he scooped his daughter into his arms, her laughter ringing through the evening air. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the echoes of the years they had lived. The losses, the mistakes, but most importantly, the choices that had led them back to each other. They had once been lost, but in the end, they had found their way back. And this time, they wouldn't let go. Life takes unexpected turns, and sometimes we lose what matters most, only to realize it was never meant to be lost. What are your thoughts on Will and Kara's story? They lost each other once, yet found their way back at the right time. Do you believe that true love can withstand time and hardships? Share your feelings in the comments below. Have you ever lost someone and wished for a second chance? Your thoughts make this story even more meaningful. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories to come. Would you like any adjustments or a different tone?